Hi, welcome everybody to our TAD Talk webinar series. We're glad that you've joined us this evening. We have well over 300 registrants for tonight's presentation from nearly 40 countries, so a special thank you, sorry, one second, to those of you who are joining us at odd hours of the day. For those of you who have not previously joined our virtual events, please note that you will be muted throughout the presentation. We encourage you to ask questions at any point during the presentation using the question box in your GoToWebinar toolbox. There will be plenty of time reserved at the end of the presentation for your questions. This presentation will be recorded and made available on our website. We recognize that the international time differences make it challenging for some of our global audience to attend the live event. No ASHA CEUs will be awarded for this presentation. However, we're happy to provide certificates of participation. We would like to recognize Bracco Diagnostics for their unrestricted educational grant that allows us to continue our TAD Talk series free of charge to our community. For those of you who made a donation upon registering for this event or for prior events, thank you. We rely on the generous financial support from our community and our corporate sponsors to further our mission. And with that, I would also like to take a moment to recognize and thank our educational sponsors, which include Cranio Rehab, Passy Mirror, Johnson Therapeutic, and a Coral Protective Spray. And before I turn this over to tonight's guest speaker, I want to briefly mention that June is Dysphagia Awareness Month, and we would love your help in continuing to raise awareness by sharing our mini podcast recordings, which are all available on YouTube and feature members of our community who have graciously volunteered to share what it's like to live with a swallowing disorder. I'd also like to encourage you to share our bite-sized insights, which are dysphagia-related facts shared by expert researchers and clinicians and can be found on our Instagram and Facebook. Our awareness campaigns reach tens of thousands of people around the globe, helping to increase awareness and spread education on a disorder that is often so invisible. And now it is my pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker, Ms. Carolyn Dolby. Carolyn is a speech-language pathologist passionate about supporting students with feeding and swallowing disorders in the school setting. Carolyn currently works as a dysphagia support SLP for one of the largest school districts in Texas. She's a published author and professor at the University of Houston. She is also a private consultant working with school districts to support program development and staff training. This is such an important topic for our community. We have heard both positive and negative experiences from parents in our support groups about the services offered in the schools, and we look forward to the insights that you have to share today. So Carolyn, thank you for volunteering your time and your expertise, and give us just 1 second while I turn this presentation over to you.
Absolutely, thanks for having me.
All right, I'm going to make you the presenter here, so you should see a pop-up to share your screen. Beautiful. Excellent. I can see you, hear you, and see your screen. So go ahead and take it away. Thanks, Carolyn.
Okay. I can't see my screen, so I'm hoping that as I go through it.
Yes, we can see your screen, but let us know if that's a problem, if you can't see what you're supposed to be
I just
seeing.
want to make sure that I'm on the right slide as I go through.
Sounds good. You're on the opening slide.
Oh, okay, then I'll just I'll just start there. Well, thank you so much for everyone that is here listening live. Again, yes, I'm Carolyn Dolby, and I do all things feeding and swallowing. It is my passion, and I've been the dysphagia support clinician for 12 years for my district. And today I want to get into, I'm going to start with kind of why dysphagia in the schools. Actually, I would like to start with there shouldn't be a why, but here we go with the why. If we think about how many more children with complex medical needs are increasingly becoming part of our inclusion models, and if you think about in your district how many more students you are getting, that what we used to think would be considered a medical focus has really transferred to the schools in response to some really pretty heavy federal and state litigation, which led to some federal regulations. And then, of course, this is also followed up with our code of ethics. In your handouts, I gave you some references to 2 disputes that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And it really, those two really set in motion and the direction that school districts needed to be in when addressing their responsibilities to respect of health, in respect of health services. In both of these cases that are in your handout, the children had severe physical disabilities that required health-related services that were needed to be provided in order for them to be at school. And unfortunately, at that time, the districts were saying, nope, this is not our responsibility. These are medical services and therefore not part of their education, and we don't need to address those. However, the decisions in both of those cases establish what's called the bright line, which reads that health-related services with the exclusion of only those medical services that may only be provided by a licensed physician can be provided in the school setting. So furthermore, it says that districts may be culpable of denying FAPE, free and appropriate public education, we'll get into that in a minute, should the failure of providing these services result in a student's inability to attend school. Additionally, in your handout, I also provided some lower court cases, and all of those lower court cases also sided with the family in regards to student safety, feeding, supervision, documentation, and staff training. Some pretty heavy stuff. So I'm going to reiterate that federal and state litigation really led to some federal regulations. And let's get into the federal regulations. So the Individual with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, as we know as IDEA, that is our primary special education law, and it established the right to FAPE. Now, FAPE means a free and appropriate public education for children with disabilities. How does feeding and swallowing fall into the scope of FAPE? Now, reading through IDEA's documents, they may not specifically indicate pediatric feeding disorders or dysphagia. However, feeding and swallowing interventions is included in the scope because pediatric feeding disorders and dysphagia can result in health-related issues, and if they are not addressed, may negatively impact a student's ability to attend school, which then would deny them access to their curriculum, which would then impede their ability to socialize with their peers. So in addition to providing FAPE, free and appropriate public education, we also need to keep in mind least restrictive environment, we'll call that LRE, which is a provision under, yes?
I'm sorry. Do you have slides for this part with information?
Yes, my slide's not going.
First. No, I'm still seeing that initial slide.
Oh no, how do I?
If you click the arrow, let's see, if you share your screen and then advance your slides, you click the right arrow on your keyboard, it may advance, or if,
oh, maybe I'm clicking the wrong, did it advance now?
Not yet, no,
Now?
sorry.
Okay, how do I?
Let's see. If you go to the sharing option and it says that first drop down of what you want to share.
Oh, okay.
Higher PowerPoint instead of just a screen, that might change.
Okay. Sorry, y'all. Hold on a minute. Let me.
That's okay. I just want to make sure people are getting this information because there's a lot packed in there.
Yeah, sorry. No, I just said a lot. Okay, I'm going to my control. Now I lost my original. Well, let me see. Oh gosh, I almost changed languages. Okay, okay, shoot.
And if you can share, let me see
Okay.
the
So,
edit mode in PowerPoint.
so I click on that and, oh, hi, how about that? Did that do it?
There we go. Yep. So now we can see your edit mode. So if you just click on the slide that you were on and then do the,
Oh, how about
there we
now?
go. Beautiful. Thank you.
All right.
Sorry about
Mischief managed. Love it. Okay, so sorry, y'all. Thanks for, oh, that was my Texas twang for you. I think where I'm going with this is we're gonna circle around and talk about LRE in a minute. And it is a provision within IDEA mandating that all children, regardless of their disability, need to be educated with their non-disabled peers to the greatest extent possible. So hang on, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Okay, now recapping again, federal and state litigation led to federal regulations establishing a child's right to FAPE. That is so important. So it should not come to any surprise that districts have to, because they have the responsibility of providing a safe environment for students at school, which includes meal times and snacks. Now, a deep dive into ethics is beyond the scope of this talk. However, I will be circling back to discuss how federal law and USDA regulations, yes, further support the rights of children with disabilities by supporting their nutritional needs in order to sustain their school day. Now, I'm going to be bold, and I'm going to state that I do believe that we are all in agreement with ASHA in that all students must be safe, meaning they need to be free of health risks such as aspiration or choking, that all students must be adequately nourished in order to participate in their education, and all students must be efficient in order to consume their meals and snacks along with their peers. Okay, now that is the why, pretty heavy stuff. And now let's get into the what and how. So this is how I, Carolyn Dolby, define dysphagia services. I define it as utilizing specialized clinicians providing student-centered feeding and swallowing interventions supported by well-trained staff following standardized procedures. Yes, I know, mouthful. I'm going to go through it. I'm going to walk us through it now. Okay, now there are several models that districts can consider when designing their dysphagia programs. And it really depends on their size, number of students, and the amount of trained staff available. So I adapted this from Emily Homer's book. She is amazing, Management of Swallowing and Feeding Disorders in the Schools. So the first one I want to touch on is a school-based team. This would be a district that has a large number of dysphagia trained clinicians, and they have the opportunity to create individual teams assigned to the schools that they serve. I see this like the in-house model, right? Where each school has their own independent team. The benefits of that are attached to this type of system includes monitoring. Being housed on the campus provides regular access to the students and to the staff that really facilitates that ongoing monitoring of students. The downside, staffing needs, of course, and training costs. Each campus must have enough trained clinicians to staff to staff school-based teams. However, as more clinicians are coming to the schools from the medical setting, they're bringing in their knowledge. And what I also want to say that us school-based clinicians are getting more training. We are building our capacity. The next one, the district-based team. This is best utilized in districts where there is a limited number of trained SLPs at the time, because again, we need to be building our capacity. If they have a limited number of students that are spread across the district, I would refer to this like as a traveling team. This team would be comprised of the SLP, an OT, and a nurse. They would be specifically trained in the assessment and treatment of dysphagia. The benefits of this concept include that you have a specialized team, and ongoing training is easier with a fewer clinicians. However, the challenge here would be time. Since the teams would not be housed on your campuses, the time to schedule that visit, that really reduces student access and ongoing monitoring. The next one let's talk about is the combination. For districts that have many dysphagia trained SLPs, but not enough to establish a school-based model at each campus at this time, a combination approach might be really the most effective model to start with. Trained SLPs would be utilized at their assigned campuses and also head up traveling and supporting the other SLPs on the other campuses. A huge benefit of this is the utilization of your existing staff. Possible challenge may be continuity of care, that different staff, different teams are doing things differently. But I had to really look for a challenge for this one. No matter what your district size or the logistics, right, of your dysphagia model, under the ASHA Code of Ethics, services delivered to students that require dysphagia intervention must be provided by clinicians with appropriate expertise. Literature also states that SLPs play a significant role in the management of students with swallowing and feeding problems within the school settings. They typically do lead the team because it's in our scope and practice. So I want to talk about the last one on there, the specialized clinician, right? So this is what I do in my district. My district has me, and I just wanted to show you kind of like my day-to-day, my job description, if you will, self-imposed. I spend my day, all day, every day, doing all things feeding and swallowing. I support students, the staff, fellow clinicians across my district. Basically, I like to say I teach, treat, and train. I teach our procedures. I collaborate with our team to support students' treatment, and I also train our staff, students, and families. Don't get me wrong, I love heading up the dysphagia support program. I love it, and that's the utilized specialized clinician part of the dysphagia services, but even I cannot do anything alone. So although my district has me, I would consider us more of a combination because I do utilize the dysphagia team on every campus. And every year I have to remind our campuses that they were part of the team. And I think that's fun. In the school setting, as we know, working in the school setting, that we are inherently a collaborative organization. We really embrace teamwork. And school-based management of dysphagia really does benefit from that collaborative approach in regards to assessment and treatment from the entire team you see or on the slide. Now, in your handouts, I've actually provided you the roles and responsibilities. It's not an extensive list, but just to get you started, everybody needs a role. And so everyone needs a starring role. And so it kind of gives you some guidelines there. You might be familiar with the term interdisciplinary teams. These are collaborative teams of clinicians, scientific clinicians working on similar goals. I am really into what is termed transdisciplinary teams. Now, this is a transdisciplinary team is comprised of scientific members. That would be the clinicians. That would be your nurses, speech path, occupational therapists, physical therapists, psych services, dietitian, right? So those scientific clinicians, along with non-scientific members, which would be everybody else on that team. And we are all working together on a common goal to achieve some real positive outcomes. Okay, so utilizing specialized clinicians, okay, providing student-centered feeding and swallowing interventions, supported by well-trained staff, standardized procedures. This one is talking about our standardized procedures. I already talked about our specialized clinicians, SLPs, OTs, PTs, nurses, dietitians, psychologists, right? So we need everybody working together to provide student-centered feeding and swallowing interventions. Okay, we need a procedure for all of that. And this is just a list of my non-negotiable components that are really needed to support swallowing and feeding in the school setting. Now, I urge you to go to Emily Homer's website. It's Students Eat Safely. I gave that reference in your handout because she provides a step-by-step process that districts can use when developing their programs. Okay, I wanted also to share, because impact statements are a big thing in the school setting when we are doing IEP meetings or ARD meetings, depending on what you call them. And this is the ICF framework. That's the International Classification of Functioning. And I really think that school-based clinicians really need to start using this matrix a lot more. You can, when you have your students' individual matrix completed, you can use, as you can see, this is just an example. Use this information when you're composing your impact statement, right? And you're going to include that in their IEP, because it really is going to illustrate the impact that their specific feeding and or swallowing disorder has on their education. The ICF framework can also assist clinicians in developing goals and objectives that support the efficacy and also the educational relevance of these services. All right. Here's a question we get a lot. Do you provide feeding therapy? This is a loaded question and everybody wants to ask it. I know, stand down. I know you're asking it. Well, this is a complicated question depending on what is the question's intent. That means, what is the asker really asking? And since I, Carolyn Dolby, always come from a place of yes, I needed to come up with a good yes to the request. So here is my broad answer to that broad question. Note the quotes, please, because this is according to Carolyn Dolby. Yes, we provide dysphagia services to all students that require dysphagia intervention to maintain safety, facilitate efficiency through shaping positive behaviors, and providing swallowing function when fostering feeding independence. I want to highlight the word required. I probably should have bolded it. Just like anything in speech therapy, all students would benefit from speech therapy, right? But in the school setting, we are a different system than private clinic. We provide students services that require, so if you think about FAPE, free and appropriate, what is appropriate? So it's students that they require it. This being said, it's the students that are not safe, not efficient, or not independently able to maintain their nutritional needs. They may need this type of support. Now, we need to talk about the continuum of support. This is just for example. Not all students that require feeding and swallowing support we require a modified diet, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Okay, so let's continue with how. How are we doing this? What are we doing? The ultimate goal for all student-centered intervention must be with and continue to be maintaining safety while facilitating efficiency, while fostering independence, and finally, providing opportunities for socialization. Here you'll see on your screen, and I also put it in your handout, these are my 8 building blocks that I utilize when I am developing or crafting dynamic, safe feeding and swallowing plans. Today, I'm just going to hit a few highlights. I'm going to run out of time if I go, so bear with me here. I want you to look at the level of support and environment. I'm going to speak to those kind of together, because we have to be careful when determining the level of support. There is a thought out there that one-on-one supervision is the gold standard. It is not. It is not. All children have the right, under the provision of FAPE and least restrictive environment, to be educated in the least restrictive environment, which extends to their eating and socializing with their peers. So I implore families and clinicians to advocate for the following hierarchy. One-on-one would be the most restrictive, and really think before you do that one. Let's consider something more along the lines of trained staff providing supervision with constant monitoring. The next one, trained staff providing supervision with close monitoring. And then the top would be least restrictive, which would be, but it would still be maintaining safety and support, would be trained staff providing standard supervision. So I promised at the beginning of the talk that I was going to circle back to talk about coordinating with food services, which will be addressing actually building block number 3 and 4. So according to the USDA, federal law and the regulations for the National School Meal Program, it requires schools to make accommodations such as texture modifications for children who are unable to eat the school meal as prepared due to a disability. Medical directives such as physician's orders are required. Now, hear me when I say medical directive of physician orders, that's one way. But if we remember that an IEP is a legal document, if it is indicated in their IEP paperwork that is as strong as a physician's order, that will provide the school districts that reimbursement for that meal. So we do want it to be either a physician's order or it needs to be written in their IEP, because this is really the, I guess you'd call that a prerequisite, if you will, and it ensures not only the necessity for that modification, because a meal modification is a more restrictive environment, but it also safeguards the student's nutritional needs as well. So ASHA endorsed the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative. Oh, that's big. We call it IDSE. It supported this adoption, and it's a universal and culturally sensitive framework. The use of the standard terminology teamed with the easily understood descriptors makes and takes out the guesswork for the staff modifying foods and liquids. It also helps comply with physicians' prescribed dietary orders, and that's another part of adopting standardized procedures. Now, I would love to give you a whole IDSE hands-on lab, so fun, don't have time, but I gave you the website. They have an extensive amount of resources for you to take a look at, videos and handouts and everything. It's fantastic. If you haven't heard of IDSE, I'm sorry. You need to find out. You'll love it. Okay. Now, ASHA's Code of Ethics also guides us clinicians to develop plans of care that reflect linguistic differences and respect cultural diversity, promoting culture and respect for inclusion. Through the implementation of dynamic dysphagia plans that are crafted to improve and maintain safety can be further bolstered by honoring families' dietary restrictions due to culture or religious affiliations. Now, as clinicians, we are always striving to provide diverse ethical, and inclusive practices as we achieve and maintain the highest level of professional competence and performance. And we do that through ongoing procurement of new knowledge and skills. So I want to end my portion with another reference. This just came out in April. This is the most recent edition of Language, Speech, and Hearing Services in the Schools, which provides extensive research on the following topics that you see here. But I have to disclose something. I am a co-author on the dysphagia service delivery in the educational setting, pediatric feeding disorders, and the culturally responsive clinician. But I do urge you to look. There's so much information out there. Okay, that concludes my portion. Do we have any questions for me?
Hey, Carolyn, thank you so much for that. We do have plenty of questions coming in, and I just wanted to call out that there is a handout available to download in your toolbar, so feel free to do that. I will also send the handout in a post-webinar email if you are unable to download that. So stay tuned for that, but let's get into these questions here. Question from a parent: how do you know if your school's SLP is knowledgeable in providing feeding and dysphagia services?
Ask.
Okay.
I mean, of course, you're a team. And that question could come across as in like, you don't want to be defensive and you don't want to put something on somebody on defense, but it's what I think the question better would be asked is going to the team and really being open and honest with the needs of your child, and how is the team going to support the child, because it doesn't have to just be the SLP. On some campuses, it's the OT that has the skill and knowledge. I've worked with a psychologist in my district once, and he had extensive, he worked for a feeding clinic. And so he also came with a toolbox of knowledge. So it is something, it just opened the dialogue and see if they don't, then who's the mentor that would help them with that.
Excellent. If they don't have an SLP or anybody on the team that's knowledgeable, what's the next step for this parent to take? How do they advocate for their child?
The ad would be who does. How are we going to, who's going to be providing the support? That is, and you need to be asking the districts that they need to be getting competent, I hate to say that they're not competent in all areas, but districts must be providing these services. So they must be providing the personnel to support the students' needs. And so whether that is in my district, it was great. They supported me going to a lot of workshops. I came in obviously with that background. However, what I learned as adult does not transfer as into pediatrics. So I was able to do a lot of workshops and self-study and things like that. That I have to keep up my C's, I have to keep up my competence. And so I did a lot of that. And so districts need to be supporting and building the capacity. Large districts might not be able to build the capacity of every single SLP and OT, but they definitely they can start building that capacity. And I'm a really big proponent of mentorship. And just because the school-based clinician might say, I don't have as much knowledge in that, but to have a mentor that can help build that capacity for them, that's priceless.
Do you have suggestions for how to find a mentor for the SLPs that are on the call that would like to advance their knowledge?
Well, I can talk to Texas. So if you're in Texas, where I'm at, I am part of the TISHA task force. We just finished a 3-year commitment, writing the eligibility, I hate that word, writing the guidelines to support districts' programs for feeding and swallowing. That 3 years is over. As soon as those come out, what I've also committed to is to be a mentor for those in the state of Texas. And so my recommendation is going to your state association. So ours is TISHA, Texas, going to your state organization and asking for a task force, asking for, this is a need out there, we need to get mentors. Now, another thing that districts should do and can do very, very easily, a district can reach out to all of their staff, all of their SLPs, all of their OTs, and say, what is your specialty? What is your interest? What do you love doing? And those that are saying feeding and swallowing, boom, now you've got your mentors. Speech paths, we are always, I think we are givers, our superpower, givers. We want to help everybody. And so I think, first of all, taking an inventory of your district, you'll find your mentors there. I hope that answered that. And then your state agencies, yes.
Excellent, thank you. We were talking about this before the webinar started, is that many SLPs only have one training course in their graduate studies on dysphagia that covers normal swallowing, disordered swallowing across the age spectrum. We have a question here from an SLP asking where they can receive more training and low-cost training because their districts don't always have funds to cover them.
Right, well, there webinars such as this, which is free, joining other groups. There's podcasts out there. Their SLP Summit. I presented for SLP Summit as well on feeding and swallowing in the schools. There are looking out for your state conferences. I know it's hard to go to the national conferences sometimes, depending on where they are, but your state conference, there's always, well, not always in the past, but going currently forward, there are, I present a lot at TISHA on supporting feeding and swallowing in the schools. Then there is going to be some cost. There are, I'm not sure if I can shout out companies, but things like speechtherapypd.com, you can get a subscription, like a yearly subscription to get your CEUs. So if you think about, as a speech path, we are mandated to keep up our CEUs. So however you are getting your CEUs, if you feel that your area which needs more is feeding and swallowing, then you need to focus your CEUs that you have to get anyway for your Cs and also for your state license. Should be, the money should be used for that, as for sure.
Excellent, thanks, Carolyn. I'm sure you've either had experience with this or somebody has asked you this question before, but how do you support a colleague or another provider who is reluctant to explore this area within their scope of practice with feeding and swallowing services?
So, yes, actually, I do get this a lot. And okay, I'm going to do the Carolyn Delightful answer, is that I support them and I handhold them and slow walk them to realizing that this is, in fact, in their scope and sequence. This is part of working at the top of your license. And kind of like when I supervise a grad student or a CF, no, more so a grad student. I don't ask them to do something that I haven't already shown them or provided them that support. And a lot of times I can find ways to show them that they already have knowledge and skills, especially if they have children. And part of it is, you know, the feeding portion of it. You fed your child, let's take a look at what's going on. How is the staff feeding the child? Do you see anything there? And they start going, oh yeah, I can see. I kind of work at where they're at their rate. So I am not going to jump them and say, I'm sorry, you got to do it. No, I want to slowly build their capacity for this. But the not so delightful answer is this isn't a choice. We don't have the choice to do it or to not do it. This is part of our scope, and we need when we get students that have a need, maybe we don't, maybe we get a child that has a voice disorder. And how often do we get a voice disorder, right? So we are reaching out and we're asking for help. We're asking for help within our district. We're getting our CEUs on that. Maybe we don't have students that that stutter very often, and so we need to brush up and learn new ways of doing things. And again, sometimes I've even had I had somebody say, well, I'm coming from the medical field, so I've done feeding and swallowing with adults, but now I'm with K-5. And I said, oh, so the language strategies that you were using with your adults, you're using with your K-5? And she's like, no. I said, oh, so you modified, you refined your strategies and your base knowledge to support the students that are on your caseload. That was my delightful and less delightful answer.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I have a question here for you. How do you identify students that require dysphagia services in your district?
Okay, so it starts with training. You have to train your staff on what is a feeding and swallowing disorder. And that is mind-blowing. When I first started in this position 12 years ago, I was able to actually go to the campuses in person and do a training. Now it's all on video because we're huge. And I would have teachers there, special ed teachers that say, I am mandated to be here, but I don't have anybody that has feeding or swallowing. I said, oh, okay, well, you know what? Thank you so much for coming. And if you have any questions, let me know. So I do my little spiel, and then I kid you not, afterwards, they'll be like, oh my goodness, I've got 3 people I need you to come see immediately. So when we know better, we do better. So training our staff. Second is asking questions. We need to have on our intake forms. Every district does things differently, and so I'm going to explain what we do in my district, so I'm sorry if the terms are different. But for example, if we have an early childhood kiddo that's coming into our ECSE, the parents fill out that intake form. And on that intake form, it needs to indicate any concerns with feeding and swallowing. Now, as we all know, that a parent might not fill it out exactly, so we need to then ask questions. Are there any feeding and swallowing concerns? And a parent might say no. And then you say, okay, so they don't need any modifications. They're going to be, you just start asking the questions. So then you also need to train your clerks, your special ed secretaries if you have them. And some people out there are going, what? You have a special ed secretary? I know. Not all of us have. Some of us have, we call them diagnosticians in Texas, but it might be your IEP facilitator that's doing that record review. You need to look through the records and see if in the past records and in the evaluation, if there's anything that indicates anything to do with feeding, anything to do with swallowing. I look at feeding first. And then again, I think I said talk to parents, but you need it. Talking to parents gives me the most intel. So it is a process. So training staff, chart reviews, record reviews, and talking with parents. I mean, and it's wonderful to build that relationship from day one before the student, if you can, before the student even hits the campus, to talk to that parent to see, are there any special things that you are doing in the home during meal times? What do your meal times look like? Tell me if there's behaviors. Are there any sensory issues, behavior issues? How is your child, how does your child obtain his food? Does he have any specific drinking systems? Are they, do they have to have a bottle and a certain type of sippy cup, or do they eat, do they only eat at certain times? Do they only have certain types of food? It's really building relationships with the family, but also with the staff. And it's huge, and we're all in it together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Building on that question, so once you've identified a student that requires these services, the question is, what exceptionality do they qualify for at their eligibility meeting if feeding is the only area that they need services in?
Oh, that is a good question. Okay. Well, wait a minute. Why are they at an eligibility meeting if it's only feeding? Because, okay, hold on, let me think for a minute. Because dysphagia, feeding, is not one of those 13 eligibilities under IDEA. However, and the child does not have to be under speech, right? So it really depends on how the feeding, because if how feeding or swallowing actually is presented. The student might be eligible under 504. Let's say they could be under 504, or maybe OHI. That's a huge indicator or a huge eligibility for a student that has feeding or swallowing. But that's a hard one to pin down because I want to know what is the impact? How is their feeding and swallowing impacting them? So I would say probably look at OHI, other health impairment, is probably the biggest one that we have dysphagia under. It could also be under AU, some of our kiddos. And then some states have a way bigger 504 than in Texas. We don't as much, but like in New York, I know that a lot of children get tons of related services under 504, and they could get serviced under that. I hope I answered that question. That was a good question.
Thank you. Yes, this is a lot of new learning for me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Question here, there's a couple questions. I'm going to combine them here. What does the billing look like for these students, and what is reimbursement like?
So I think it's a little different for me because I'm working at the district level. I'm not sure I can. Oh man, I'm not sure I'm going to answer that question in the best way because I'm not going to be able to roll off a code for billing. So when I talked about reimbursement, I was talking about the meal reimbursement. When I brought that up, so that's why I use that term, is for when the cafeterias need to be reimbursed for that meal when they're making it a substitution or adaptation. If it's okay, I might have to get back to you, and I have to speak with some colleagues because we do it a little bit different in my district. Sorry.
Sure. Absolutely, thank you. A question here for you. What is your explanation for the difference between school-based or educational services and medical or clinical services when parents are requesting swallowing therapy for a student who is 100% tube fed, where their nutritional needs are already being met?
Okay, right. So the first thing we need to talk about is the system. We are an education system. We're here for education, right? And so the child is 100% tube fed, so their nutritional needs are being met. Okay. Again, I don't know if I said this earlier when I was talking about do we do feeding therapy? We are not a feeding clinic. That is a different concept. That is a family-centered concept that is outside of the school. We are not food handlers. We don't have access to foods and kitchens and all of those things that a feeding clinic would have. If a child is 100% tube fed, I've got two answers for this. Okay, I'm going to give an answer that a parent might not like, but then I'm going to give another one that a parent will like. So, because it is not cut and dry. If that student on the paperwork is NPO, nothing by mouth, because they are aspirating, we as a school district must keep our students safe. It is never okay for us to have a goal that says that they will not show signs of symptoms of complications 70% of swallows. Not that that would be a great goal. I'm just throwing out ridiculousness right now. But it is never okay for us to put a student at risk. So if we have documentation from a doctor that the student must be NPO, then we cannot be doing anything in the school setting for that. That's not our setting. Now, if the student is not NPO and there is physician's recommendations there's some instrumental that backs this up that the student is safe, then if they're not NPO, then let's get them. Where can we meet them? What can we be doing? How can we include them in participating? Are they able to do trace tastes? What is the safest? Then we would need to go back, redo, take a look at all the medical records and the most updated swallow and evaluations that are from outside. What can we do in the schools that is going to help increase their participation, but still keeps them the safest? And I think that's one of the scariest ones, because staff in the schools, we don't want to cause harm to a child. And so, and I get it. But if a student is cleared, then yes, we need to get them doing whatever we can, whether that is trace tastes of things, small sips, controlled sips. Yeah, but unless it is, again, we're a school setting, we're not a clinic where you go in and then you go home and the parent is with them and can monitor. They're here for their education. So if they are cleared, that they are cleared for controlled sips or trace tastes, then yes, we need to add that to their day.
Excellent, thanks. I have a question similar to that from a mom who's part of our pediatric support group, whose child was cleared to have a diet, bite-sized, but she was concerned that he wouldn't have the level of supervision that he needs to eat that safely. If the parent wanted to send him with a lunchbox of pureed items just because she knows and feels comfortable that he could safely consume that, even if he doesn't have that supervision, how would you address that situation with the parent? Is that okay? You're obviously restricting the diet more than what's necessary. What's the best way to approach that?
I personally would have a big talk with the parent to say, we need to have this child in the least restrictive environment. I don't want a child to be on puree when they can do soft and bite size. Are you kidding? No. So we need to find out, we need to get that feeding plan in place that the child, with whatever level of supervision is needed, and that we can play with that. Maybe because we want that child to be with their peers. So, okay, couple of answers for this one. So maybe if, depending on what the environment is that they're eating lunch, if they're eating with general ed, and so they're with a big group and they want to socialize, and the child's going to do puree because they're independent, so they can talk and visit and have a great time, I may be okay with that. And then for snacks for a smaller meal in the classroom where there's more supervision, then we do a more advanced diet. I do that all the time for students that I'm trying to bring them from puree to minced and moist, soft and bite size. I might have their main meal be a more restrictive, but more independent. But I'm really going to talk to the parent and see, because I have to see the child. Answering some of these questions, I might look like I'm hemming and hawing. The only reason I'm doing that is because it's hard for me to give an answer when I don't see the child, because a child that is cleared for soft and bite size, but parent wants to do puree, two huge different presentations, right? One student can be running and in a general ed classroom and does it just for whatever reason is on a more restricted diet versus a child that might be have OI, might have something orthopedic, might have something pulmonary that is actually work of breath. So having to maybe a child that has something neurological, like maybe a CP or something like that, where fatigue comes into play. And so the puree is more efficient, but they're cleared for soft and bite size, but they can't sustain that for a whole meal. If my best answer is when I see the child, then I can give you a way better answer. But more often than not, I want the child on the least restricted diet with just enough supervision that we're all happy and all safe. But even if we have to start with a more restrictive supervision in order for everyone to be comfortable, then we need to start backing off that supervision as that child becomes more confident, more efficient, and is able to sustain that advanced texture, because we don't want to hold a child back. We want to keep moving them through that continuum always. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And thanks for mentioning that it's not a one size fits all and that you need to consider all aspects of the student and their family and what they are capable of. I have a question here from a student. This may be a big question or a whole webinar topic on its own. Can you describe the difference between a pediatric feeding disorder and a dysphagia diagnosis, or is there overlap, and what's the difference?
Yes, okay, that is a big ask, but okay, so you need to go to Feeding Matters. They have this wonderful illustration of what pediatric feeding disorders are. Now, pediatric feeding disorders may or may not have dysphagia or a swallowing component to it. So you might have just a feeding disorder, or you might have feeding disorder and dysphagia. And so, oh gosh, that is such a good question. That would be an amazing other webinar on going through the 4 components of a feeding disorder, which would be the physical component or function, your psychosocial, sorry, that took me a minute to get it, your skill, and then, oh gosh, how did I forget the 4th one right now? I do pediatric feeding all the time. The sensory component that might be, oh, the difference would also be like the oral phase versus the pharyngeal phase versus the esophageal phase. That's another way to explain it. And we can't forget the pre-oral phase, because if I can't get anything into their mouth, then I have nowhere to go. Oral phase. But go to Feeding Matters. They have this wonderful illustration that will really give you a lot of information on that. That was a great question.
Thank you. I want to be mindful of the time here. We've had a few participants mention some good resources. The ASHA Learning Pass is offering a lot of professional development related to pediatric dysphagia and feeding disorders. So check that out if you're an SLP and interested in that. Feeding Matters has courses. I know the American Board of Swallowing and Swallowing Disorders has a $35 pediatric dysphagia track this summer that they're offering, all online for that. And then let's see, we have so many questions here, Carolyn, and we won't get to all of them tonight. But if you have a question that wasn't addressed during this and you would like the answer to that, please feel free to reach out to us. The email is info@nfosd. I'll be sending a follow-up email, so you'll have that here. And let's do one more question here about the transition. So if there's kiddos that are in a birth to 3 program or a preschool program that are transitioning into elementary school that already have a feeding plan, how does that transition go? Is it the same clinician providing that handoff? Is it the same clinician providing that treatment?
Oh, it may not be the same clinician. It might not even be the same school. So a student that might be zoned for EI, birth to 3, may be zoned to another campus. And so unfortunately, you know, that we can't always say it's going to be the same clinician. However, that feeding plan should come with the child, right? But hear this. This is now a different environment and a different setting, and other things now need to be looked at. So what was needed in one setting may or may not be needed in this setting. Something that was not needed in that setting may now be needed in this setting. And so it needs to come with the student, needs to come in their paperwork, but then the campus would be remiss if we did not immediately update those feeding plans. I call them dynamic for a reason. They're not static. We don't write a feeding plan and then that's what they have for the rest of their lives. They constantly need to be monitored for their efficacy. They need to be monitored for least restrictive environment. It needs to be monitored for safety on the other side. Sometimes we have children that have a progressive medical issue, and whereas they were on a certain diet and now it's not as safe anymore. Maybe there's a change in medication. There are so many extra components that affect feeding and swallowing. Maybe there is an acute incident that happened that's changing their presentation. And so my answer is yes, it needs to come in, but it needs to be immediately looked at and revised as necessary.
Thank you. Well, Carolyn, I'm going to pause here with the questions, but again, email us if we didn't get to your question and you would like an answer. I want to thank you so much for presenting tonight on this topic. We have not done a topic similar to this since I've been with the foundation, which has been 10 years now. So thank you for sharing that. It's so important that these students, these children are getting the services that they require. And so if anybody needs an advocate, please feel free to reach out to us, reach out to Carolyn. We're happy to help support you with this, because there's a lot of unknowns, and I think, you know, transitioning into the school setting for parents who have children with feeding and swallowing difficulties is a scary move to begin with. So the more support you have, we're happy to help guide you with that. So again, thank you everybody for joining us. I'll be sending out an email, and Carolyn, again, thank you so much for your time tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.